Fascist propaganda is extremely manipulative and dangerous. It's one of the many reasons that the far right is on the rise. After Rage After Storm's video on race realism, there are a lot of YouTubers within anti-SJW spheres who came to her defense. One of these YouTubers was called MouthyBuddha, and his video How the Skeptic Community Has Changed is where I discovered his channel. It was one of the few that didn't come from an open alt-right type, but I wasn't impressed by the fancy music or the breathy Sam Harris-esque narration. It starts out by arguing many skeptic figures have become more charitable to social justice, and argues that they are adopting the talking points of social justice advocates. Without giving any substantial criticism of the stream debunking Rage After Storm, he decided to dismiss most of their arguments as childish without addressing any of their points. Except one, but we'll get to that later. Then he says a very odd thing about white nationalists.
Millennial Woes and Jared Taylor are no Riley Dennis. They are no Milo Stewarts. They are intellectual. They use facts.
How skeptical, asserting people are intellectual and factual without presenting any evidence. Many would claim that there is an implication here. This was the first point at which some realised this guy might be hiding his power level, and it didn't stop there.
And adopt their detractors' talking points.
And then on top of that, you have to assume that IQ is actually a measure of intelligence. Now, I know IQ stands for the intelligence quotient, but that doesn't actually mean that IQ directly correlates to how smart you are as a person. It just fucking doesn't.
We need to understand the validity of IQ to know that this is real and predictive of human behavior.
Buddha's assertion that alt-right claims about IQ are undeniable facts without giving any evidence of A, it being a good measure of intelligence in response to Jeff's point, B, it being largely genetic, or C, it being disproportionately lower in black people, is argued to mean one of two things. He's either trying to sound scientific, without putting any real work into it, or he really wants it to be true and doesn't want to put any real work into proving it. But none of this is convincing to skeptics. Convincing them Rage After Storm was fash was a difficult enough endeavour, and she cited the Daily Stormer. So let's go a bit further forward in time. So MouthyBuddha then decided to start criticising the alt-right, making a series that would be so much better than the likes of myself or ContraPoints. So let's have a look at his first video. After 4.5 minutes of whining about other people criticising the alt-right with such insane statements like,
and white nationalism isn't about facts.
See what I did there? I used a buzzer to debunk your point. And masturbating over the attention he's gotten. Don't forget praising a Daily Stormer article. And another 2.5 minute sketch making light of genocide. That was disturbing. After all of this, his first criticism seems to be that the alt-right thinks about race just a little bit too much for him. His second criticism is that the alt-right tells people what to do. Don't worry, he's not saying that they're right-wing SJWs though. To him, the alt-right's grievances all exist and are real and are completely legitimate, unlike the SJWs whose issues are all fake. He's just saying that they're really reactionary and tribalist on the internet. But not all of them are. A lot of them are really smart and nice and reasonable and intellectual and awesome. Wait, that's it? The video just ended. That's the revolutionary and substantive critique of the alt-right that this guy gives. That they get pissy with people who disagree with them. This is what the skeptic community views as intellectual. This video is nothing more than a long-winded triggered meme. So here is the hypothesis that some detractors have raised. MouthyBuddha's criticism of the alt-right is intentionally vapid. Centrist and anti-SJW people will eat it up and cheer it on, but it won't be convincing to an alt-righter. So far, his only points have come across as constructive criticism towards their behaviour more than anything else, criticising the alt-right nominally, but still promoting their core ideas on race and their grievances. Effectively, MouthyBuddha's videos would be claimed to act as more of a shifting of the Overton window towards alt-right talking points while masquerading as anti-alt-right content. And the best part is he hasn't had to justify a single one of the alt-right's talking points, just reassert that they are factual, and watch as others defend his content purely because it contains some criticism. More gullible viewers of Buddha's videos will then give the alt-right's views some second thoughts. But clearly, this is tinfoil conspiracy theory bullshit. This has never happened before within the skeptic community ever. But how could one justify that MouthyBuddha was hiding his power level? Science. Or more specifically, using the scientific method to confirm a hypothesis. Asking oneself the question, if I were hiding my power level, how would I explain the JQ such that I don't set off the fasci alarm for centrists? I'd say everything the alt-right believes is happening. That Jewish politicians and businessmen are mostly out to promote multiculturalism in everywhere but Israel, and this is mostly caused by group interest, not a conspiracy. How well did mine hold up? MouthyBuddha's first video, just like much of contemporary fascist advocacy, starts out by poisoning the well against critics and any labels one may put on them for advocating certain positions. He complains that he can't say what he does without being called an anti-Semite, which is not a good sign. Starting out by suggesting that bringing up this topic at all, criticism of Israel, or even criticising individual Jews is often called anti-Semitism. For once, I'm actually going to have to agree with MouthyBuddha. Such conspiracy theories aren't going away anytime soon, so they need to be addressed honestly, otherwise it will just lead to an enforcement of such beliefs and allow them to spread further. However, the examples he then brings up to prove that we can't talk about the Jews are very telling.
German court sentenced an 87-year-old grandma to 10 months in jail for denying the Holocaust.
That YouTube star, PewDiePie, who was dropped by Disney for anti-Semitism, I think there's a development there.
PewDiePie paying children to say death to Jews, and a woman arrested for denying the Holocaust in Germany. Neither of these are exactly criticizing individual Jews now, are they? One is an overly edgy joke about actual genocide of the Jews, and the other is buying into what is an overwhelmingly anti-Semitic conspiracy theory in a country that's extremely touchy about that subject, from a woman who is a known neo-Nazi propagandist. These are very bad examples if you want to suggest that criticizing individual Jews and criticizing Israel are what you're going to be called anti-Semitic for. It's almost like he's weaving a narrative. Well, you know what, Buddha? I'm going to be talking about the Jewish question in this video too. Let's see how many people mistake me for being anti-Semitic. And facetious guys in the comments who are now going to call me anti-Semite just to try and prove a point, I know who you are, and that doesn't count. So his first point about the Jewish question is a verse from the Talmud. This is extremely disingenuous, since being Jewish is often simply related to ethnicity and not religion. This does not apply to a significant subset of Jews. On top of that, even those who are religious may not follow that part of the Holy Book. There's equally genocidal parts of the Bible and Quran, but it doesn't mean everyone who follows some Abrahamic religion is part of some international force to exterminate non-believers. To give him credit, he does go on to explain the former point, but not the latter one. His next point about the Jewish question is that Jews are disproportionately found in the higher echelons of society, in banks, in government and in media. After a bit of fluff listing off powerful Jewish people, including Abraham Foxman, National Director of the ADL, because I'm sure that was going to be a Muslim, Jeff Zucker, president of CNN, although he isn't actually the big boss since CNN is owned by Time Warner, whose CEO is a Christian, and Rupert Murdoch, who isn't Jewish. This might be when detractors point out that it's common for anti-Semites to falsely accuse powerful people of being Jewish. After 2 straight minutes of listing Jews with political power and then hand-wringing over their disproportionate representation in government, where have I heard that before, he decides to start his counter-argument. MouthyIQ. Instead of explaining the historical precedent as to why Jews have a history in banking due to them being shunned from the rest of society, and Christians viewing it as immoral to charge interest on loans, he uses the IQ argument. Well, maybe he'll argue against the idea that Jews hate America and the West a bit better than this. He brings up counterexamples of Jews that weren't anti-American, except goes on to admit his own examples were bad, and when bringing up the idea that Jews whose interests are opposed to the West are a majority, it's automatically the default position, right after saying most Jews have obviously assimilated into American culture. So he knowingly brought up bad counterexamples? He intentionally made his own argument weaker. Even I'm going to admit this doesn't make sense. It's like he intentionally argued against the JQ badly. It's not the only point he later rebuts himself. After pointing out that many within the alt-right criticise Jews' perceived tribalism, but want to be tribal themselves, he goes on to point out that many in the alt-right don't do this, but just hate a perceived double standard when it comes to Jews and whites. So it begs the question, why bring up these points in the first place if he knows they're bad arguments? And a bigger question, after tearing down all of his points critical of the JQ, what arguments are left at the end of the video? Here's a quick chart I cooked up, showing how many of the alt-right arguments he has accepted, and which ones he has rejected. Tell me that this is entirely reasonable, and presenting both sides. Now go back and watch that video again. What points does he emphasize? What points does he quickly move past? What is he trying to hammer into your head, and what does he want to throw in there just to tick off a box? And then his second video about the JQ came out. This one is so obviously bullshit I don't even know where to start. So, let's just pick a random one. His arguments against Jewish hypocrisy towards Israel.
The Holocaust and anti-Semitism. The Jewish people have a history so graphic and disturbing that they deserve a place of their own.
Bigotry against the Jews justifies their ethnostate. Well, this totally isn't a slippery slope, because nobody ever uses the claim of bigotry against whites to justify white nationalism. Another point worth mentioning might be that if you've engaged with the alt-right online at all, it's guaranteed you'll eventually come across the alleged double standard towards Israel, that the Jews get their ethnostate and whites don't. MouthyBuddha is advocating the exact straw man the "what about Israel" crowd desperately want, as the only counterpoint against the Jewish question. And now we get into the Holocaust. Great. One point here, though, really caught my eye.
Not to mention the 6 million Jews killed doesn't hold up at all. Even the New York Times published a story documenting the Polish government's decision to change the wording on the stone tablets at Auschwitz to include within the 1.5 million number figure all of the other races whose lives were also lost, including Poles, Gypsies, Soviet prisoners of war.
Except the number of non-Jews was referred to in the article as thousands. It's not exactly a massive proportion for one, and the article doesn't say anything about how this affects the total of people killed. It's never claimed to have been counted as part of the 6 million figure before or after the addition to the tablet. To say that 6 million Jews doesn't hold up purely because there were several thousand non-Jews included on a memorial stone in Auschwitz is nothing more than a narrative push. Besides, it's not a new revelation, it's a 25-year-old story. And let's also go with the questioning of whether the Nazis were actually genocidal.
Many JQers also talk about the Havara Agreement of 1933, which was an agreement between Nazi Germany and Zionist Jews, in which the Nazis helped and assisted in the migration of approximately 60,000 Jews to Palestine. Does this sound like a group of people hell-bent on mass genocide? No. If anything, throughout the quote, Holocaust, Nazis showed restraint to the Jewish people.
He uses the Havara Agreement of 1933, which allegedly shows that the Nazis weren't at all hell-bent on genocide. However, all this shows is that Nazi policy wasn't originally clear-cut when it came to the Jewish question. And it doesn't debunk the existence of the Holocaust in any way. Okay, the Nazis attempted to get rid of Jews in different ways before settling on mass murder. It's pretty well known that the Nazis didn't start the genocide in 1933. They ramped up their anti-Semitic policies over time, opening their first concentration camp in 1937, 4 years after the Havara Agreement. So much for peaceful ethnic cleansing, am I right? And what are his responses to this slew of misinformation and propaganda in this video? Debunking it? Admitting mistakes? Even doing his signature assert it's bullshit without evidence and keep going move? No, he leaves it out there, in his video, for people to hear, with nothing but a disclaimer suggesting that the video doesn't necessarily reflect his views. As if that matters. Oh, don't worry, I just posted a bunch of anti-Semitic propaganda making apologetics for Adolf fucking Hitler in my videos, but it's not something I believe, so therefore it's fine that it's being cast to thousands of people without any refutation. And how is this presenting both sides? Unless by both sides he means two alt-righters arguing about the Jewish question. It's not like this information is exactly hard to find or hard to debunk, but people are lazy and unfortunately take content creators' words for things. And the alt-right agrees. They're suggesting this video be used to help red pill people on the JQ. But someone may ask one question now. Why would someone think that this is intentional narrative pushing rather than simply his positions? Well, number one, his defenses of alt-right positions are almost uniformly lacking in citation. Number two, his criticisms of the alt-right's ideology are almost uniformly rebutted by himself. Number three, his only criticisms he leaves alone are the ones that act as constructive criticism against the alt-right. Number 4. His advocacy of a unified American nationalism as opposed to open white nationalism lines up identically with recent moves to unite the right and Andrew Anglin's own attempts to rebrand the alt-right. And we forgot one more. Braving Ruin. For many watching this video, you may not remember Braving Ruin's original persona, Edgy Sphinx, an individual who was consuming and liking alt-right content at least as far back as 2014. Claimed to be a moderate.
I consider myself part of the alt-right, and part of the reason why I'm being more open about this now, I wasn't so open about it a couple of months ago, part of the reason I'm being more open about this now is because I think it's important for people with a platform to step up and say, no, we're not about racism, we're not about supremacy, we're about, identity is not the same thing as identity politics. Kraut himself has expressed fears of the far right rising in Europe, and I think those fears are at least somewhat legitimate. We both value individual rights and liberties such as free speech, meritocracy, and due process, all classical liberal principles.
And attempted to covertly red pill anti-SJWs and psychologically exploit them, his own words, into supporting white nationalism. He also admitted to making dog whistles towards white genocide in one of his videos. And MouthyBuddha's video on the Jewish question gives a special thanks to him. And then Braving Ruin goes on to say this was the exact rhetoric that he got attacked for a year ago. The only thing that's so surprising is how open he can be about this. Imagine a self-proclaimed moderate Muslim for a minute. Imagine they were going to make content explaining that they are going to criticize Salafism, the religious sect of ISIS, yet they claim that Salafist views on reality are accurate, that their complaints about Western degeneracy are legitimate, and then happens to advocate identical religious policies to ISIS members. Imagine this individual was coordinating with a known ISIS sympathizer, one who also claimed to be moderate before he was exposed as such, and then goes on to point out the points that he was widely criticised for were the same points being made by this new moderate Muslim. What would the reaction of the skeptic community, Trump supporters, classical liberals, and fans of MouthyBuddha be? Hell, Linda Sarsour is nowhere near on this level, but a handful of tweets about Sharia were enough to have constant coverage from the skeptics about it, and in my opinion, rightly so. Yet these same people, the ones who would be morally outraged if a left-winger were to support fake moderate Muslims, are openly supporting and promoting someone who pushes and promotes alt-right talking points that aren't backed up by evidence, taking directions from a self-proclaimed alt-right propagandist purely because he professes to be a classical liberal, like the propagandist he is taking directions from used to. The only defense he has is that the views presented in his videos are not representative of his positions. But does that really hold up when he's presenting such views uncritically? So ask yourself some questions. Is this guy really honest? Is there a potential agenda behind this? Is MouthyBuddha maybe another snake in the grass?